Becoming an airline pilot, a dream which is out of reach for many young boys and girls. Maybe that's your dream, or simply you are at the high school, you're considering continuing to the university, but you realize that university is fairly expensive and it requires significant effort from your personal point of view in terms of study, leading them to jobs that very often are repetitive, boring, very low on responsibility, and very often with very limited financial return. Well, today, thanks to the funds of private airline companies, you might access the job of the airline pilot with an effort in both financial point of view and personal study point of view, which is very similar to a university study. If you always dreamed to be a pilot, this is the perfect pathway to make your dream come true. And if you never thought about it, this route will bring you in discovering a completely new and exciting world, the world of aviation. A job that gives you a lot of responsibility, but also a significant financial return. If you're interested in becoming an airline pilot, follow me into the Pilot Lounge. Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my Pilot Lounge. Then today we are discussing on how to become a pilot. My name is Margherita. I am a pilot, a captain, a line training captain, doing training in flight, doing training in the simulator because I'm also instructor in the simulator, examiner, and as a matter of fact I'm the chief type rating instructor for Aviomar at the Aviomar Training Center in Rome, Monterotondo. Today we're discussing the pathways to become a pilot. But in all cases, I carry on saying that all my videos are to be taken as just a chat with a friend. So there is no official use you can do of the information that I'm giving to you throughout my videos. All you can do is, as I say, take it as a chat with an old friend who's a pilot and can give you a little bit of hints and suggestion about the topic, which today is becoming pilot. I carry on saying that yes, I will be sponsorizing the Ryanair Future Flyer Academy through the Aviomar program, which is a specific product, of course. I will be discussing of different pathways to become a pilot, not only this program, but as a matter of fact, I hold no direct interest and I hold no guarantee that what I'm saying remains correct at the moment this video is published. It could be that as I am recording, Aviomar and Ryanair decided to change everything, to completely change the training program. And because I have no direct involvement in this, I'm just an instructor. So it's the companies that call me and say, hey, I need an instructor for this program, for the Ryanair program. Okay, and I go and teach, but they're not obliged to inform me of any change. So it could be that all I'm saying is wrong. Now, I would be very surprised that there are major changes because this program is really a successful program. It's a great product. I don't think there's going to be any major changes, but there could be in time definitely changes. So don't take everything as granted, especially when it comes about money and prices. Absolutely don't take it as granted. This say, let's move forward and say on why would you become a pilot? Okay, so why deciding to become a pilot? Well, first of all, we have to say that becoming a pilot is not something that is given for free. Not every single European boy and girl today might decide to become a pilot. Becoming a pilot requires self-financing. There is no Italian state fund, there is no European fund that will help you in facing the cost of becoming a pilot. So all the expenses are on you. Now, with the Ryanair Future Flyer Academy, actually, this is wrong because Ryanair will be financing a consistent amount of your training, meaning that you will be saving quite a good amount of money, but we will get back into this detail later on. So yes, there are financing. Sometimes you can find financing, as it is for the Future Flyer Academy, but those financing, obviously, they're all coming from private funds. Being a pilot, I would say, is the most exciting job. I have tried different jobs, and I strongly am of this opinion that being a pilot is probably the most beautiful job on earth. But of course, this is an opinion which is totally personal. What makes it a great job? Well, the first thing is, compared to the wide majority of other job where you go to the office or you go to your working place, and every single day you find the same colleagues, you find the same faces. So it's really annoying. Now, you might have very nice colleagues, and I mean, if you're lucky, I hope you do. But as a matter of fact, a pilot will be in contact with dozens, if not even hundreds of people every day, and every day is different people. It's very rare that a pilot flies with the same co-pilot, or that you as a co-pilot fly with the same captain, for the entire month. Normally, in normal companies, this doesn't happen. If you work for Ryanair, you will be changing every day the captain, and it's an extremely rare event if you fly 2 days with the same captain. So the job of a pilot, it includes a lot of variety. And this is something that I would say give you a little bit of fresh air from the typical routine of the majority of the jobs that you find around. Another thing that makes the job great is, of course, the traveling. It is the technical aspect. And I would say is the fact that no matter what is your interest, when you get into the world of aviation, you most likely gonna find that interest. In fact, the world of aviation is extremely wide, is a word itself. Yes, there is the technical aspect. So basically, we're talking of technical knowledge, okay? Mechanical stuff, knowledge of the aircraft. Today, of course, there is a lot of electronics and computering things. But then there is an aspect which is, for example, about all regulation. So the regulatory aspect is still part of the aviation world, and is something that if you really want to get properly into the regulatory aspect, we're nearly talking of being a lawyer. So the aviation regulation are very deep, detailed, and consistent. So, if you're interested in that, you can, improve your knowledge in that area and get very professional with aviation regulation, and that's something that makes you very specific on that area of knowledge. Another area of knowledge is the human factor. So the human factor, we'll talk a little bit of psychology and medicine. So you wouldn't think when you start studying in aviation that flying would include something which is medical, which is psychology, but actually is one of the most important area in aviation today. So you see, being a pilot requires mixing all those areas, require knowledge, a basic knowledge of all those areas. But then if you find something that really makes you interested, you can really increase your knowledge in that specific area. And that's one of the things that makes the job interesting, because somehow it is challenging. It keeps you awake. It's definitely not a boring job. It's definitely not a job where you go and every day is the same. I've been going thousands of times to London. I've been flying thousands of times to Paris. Obviously, this is routine because we got a lot of flights daily, like 3 or 4 flights to Paris, So obviously I've been going there, thousands of times, but it's never really routine. I mean, I'm familiar with the places. I know what to expect, but every single flight is different from another one. Every time you got something specific happening, and you have to be ready to manage that possibility of the something specific happening. So that's what makes flying really original and particular, and that's what makes this job great. Now, for what concerns the lifestyle in terms of rostering, the planning of the pilot, I would say it's fairly good. Normally a pilot gets around 10 days off per month, and you normally find in companies 2 different options, and I've been working with both. With variable roster, where more or less half of the month you get the planning for the following month, and with fixed roster, where you have a fixed pattern, and so you know exactly when you're going to be on duty, when you're going to be off duty. Another great difference is companies that give you overnights against companies that give you only daily flights. My experience have been flying with variable roster, which, well, it is nice. We had overnights, so the nice thing is that the company is paying to you hotels and you find yourself somewhere in the world and visiting new cities. Now the problem is that when it's long haul, that's quite okay because you got fairly long stops, so you can visit the city. But when it's short haul, very often the overnight or the hotel is just, arriving at evening, staying there the night, and the morning after, maybe slightly late, around 11, but the morning after you're leaving again. So what happens is that you don't really have time to visit the place. And spending 20 nights in the hotel every month, in my personal case, after a while, it became a little bit tiring. So yes, it was nice, but I didn't particularly enjoy it, to be honest. The Ryanair planning style is completely different. You have a fixed roster, and that's a great advantage for your personal life, because this means that you work on a fixed 5 working day, 4 days off, meaning that for the entire year, you know when you're going to be working and you know when you're going to be off. So you can plan your personal things way before. Now, when I had variable roster, as I said, the 15th of the month, I had the roster for the following month. So basically, in November, I couldn't plan absolutely anything about January unless I would ask for annual leave, because I had no idea in January when would I get a day off. Now with the Ryanair fixed roster, this doesn't happen because you have 5-4, so for the entire year, you know exactly when you get the days off. So you can plan your personal life much more easier. The other advantage is that you only get daily flights, so very rarely you stay in the hotel. It could happen, I'm not saying you never get to the hotel. Sometimes it happens that you do have overnight, but it's very rare. I would say no more than once per month if it is. And it's normally, I would say, in a kind of unexpected or emergency base that they send you what we call out of base, and then you need an hotel to get out of base. So this means that basically every night you're back home and it's kind of working in the office at the end. I know it might be a bit more boring compared to staying in the hotel, but in the long term, I find that it was much more relaxing and much more helping your personal life. In fact, in my case, it became very useful when I started having family and, I wanted to stay a bit more with kids. And staying in the hotel for 20 nights a month really doesn't leave you much time to spend with your family. And then what happens is that you're half day home, but then your kids are at school and you're alone home doing nothing, okay? Well, with Ryanair, this didn't happen because very often, yes, I was flying, but then I was getting back a late night, or maybe I was starting early morning, getting back in the afternoon. So I at least had the morning or at least had the evening to spend with the family. I would say a fixed roster 5-4 is much more better, especially for the family man. Now, if you're young, probably you won't care that much, and I totally understand that. But that's something that you might consider when choosing the company. The roster type is something that is very interesting. Another roster, but I never tried, another roster that is very common for pilots that actually work abroad, so outside Europe, so they call it commuter rosters. You can find on the market some roster that keep you like flying for one entire month, and then you got like 15 days home, or one entire month flying, one entire month at home. This is an option that is very often used by foreigner companies, that they employ pilots that live far away, so they give long-haul flights to their pilots. They position for the start of duty, they work for an entire month, and then they get back home for the remaining time off. So in conclusion, we can say that the lifestyle of a pilot is not extremely hard, okay? Being a pilot normally will leave you a decent amount of time off. The reason being that the flight times, daily flight time limitation are quite high. So for example, with Ryanair, you work 5 days, you got 4 days off, when a normal person works 5 days and then only 2 days off. But at the same time, the working day might be a bit longer. Your duty could be scheduled for as much as 10 or even 11 hours. It's quite rare, but legally that is possible. Normally, if you have a long day, then of course the day after is going to be a fairly short day. But the fact that the working day might be slightly longer makes then you get more time off. And I find this as being an advantage as compared to the normal people who just get 2 days off out of 5 work. Now, deciding to become a pilot today might be a very good choice, because what happens is that the aviation industry is facing a shortage of pilots. In the 80s, I would say since the end of World War II until the 80s, we had the entire aviation industry growing very fast, military and civilian, and we had a massive transfer of military pilots to the civilian aviation. This phenomena kind of slowed down and even completely stopped around the 70s, the 80s, and I would say stopped in the 90s. In few words, this means that you have a large amount of pilots that has been coming into the aviation industry from the previous century, starting from the 50s, continuing the 60s, 70s, and I would say even in the 80s. But at this point, around the 80s, this flow of pilots stopped. Of course, the commercial aviation, the civil aviation produces its own pilot, and we kept giving a flow of pilots to the industry. But this flow of pilots is relatively limited to what the transit of military pilots from military to civil was, which means that today we have a fairly large number of pilots which are approaching the retirement age, and the civil aviation industry cannot provide the amount of pilot that the industry would need. Also because the industry is growing. The aircraft are getting fairly reliable and they're still flying, so that the aircraft that get scrapped are less than the aircraft that get produced. So in total, the number of aircraft flying around the world is increasing, and if the aircraft increases, it means that you need more pilots. The requirement of pilot is expected to be such that by 2030, if the civil aviation continue to produce the amount of pilot that we are producing today, by 2030 there will be a shortage of approximately 600,000 pilots worldwide. Now, many of you could say, yes, but the aviation industry, same as any other transport industry, will move into a pilot-less environment. So there will be in future drones flying and the pilots are not going to be needed. I tell you, that is totally wrong. It's nearly impossible, because aviation certification is extremely strict. I hardly see a reasonable way to transform our today certified aircrafts, certified with 2 pilots, to transform it into a single pilot or even a no pilot required for commercial air transport. So drones exist. Maybe something will change in the future, possibly yes, but not, I would say, definitely not on the today existing aircraft models, not with the regulations that we have. And I hardly believe that we're going to be deregulating, because the aviation industry is already deregulating some of the, I would say, conventional system. So yes, there is a movement towards the automated flight, a strong movement towards the automated flight in aviation, but this movement is not enough to completely remove a pilot from the flight deck. What I see a bit more likely is that future aircrafts could be certified single pilot. Not that today doesn't exist. Today we do have drones, today we do have single pilot aircraft that can be used for commercial air transport, but for example the regulation prohibits to make commercial air transport on single pilot operation. So it could be that there is a deregulation that allow those specific aircraft model to be flown single pilot even in commercial air transport, and this of course would save the number of pilots in aviation. So yes, there could be a movement towards this direction. There could be new aircraft coming out which are designed to be flown by a single pilot. I would strongly doubt, but for example on the long haul flight, today we need an augmented crew, because the crew on a 14-17 hours flight, they need to take rest during flight. So maybe we need 3 or even 4 pilots on board the aircraft. Well, it could be that there is a kind of deregulation where the automation will be so strongly certified that maybe we can do a long haul flight with only 2 pilots. But even if we take into consideration these numbers, well, this does not significantly reduce this need of 600,000 pilots in the next 5 years. Probably in the next decade, this will reduce the amount of pilots. But as I said, the existing aircraft most likely is going to be impossible to convert in single pilot or even no pilot. I see this thing as an extremely unlikely outcome, which means that because the lifespan of an aircraft is between 30 and 50 years, depending on the aircraft model, once an aircraft is produced today and this aircraft requires 2 pilots, it means that those 2 pilots has to be sitting on this aircraft for the next 50 years. So basically, in numbers, there is a good guarantee that the industry will need pilots. So this is an absolutely glorious moment to become a pilot. But here, stop for a second. Not everything is as beautiful as it looks like. Today, when there are pilot assessment on companies, the fail rate in the major hiring European companies, the fail rate at the pilot assessment is in excess of 50%. So coming from white tail, when Ryanair was hiring pilots not coming from his own training program, but just coming from whatever flight school in Europe. So the last number that Ryanair provided to Aviomar was that approximately we were around 50, maybe 55% pass rate, meaning that over 10 pilots, as average, only 5 passed the assessment with Ryanair. And these numbers are confirmed by other company hiring, like could be Wizz Air, like could be other European companies, where they do run assessments, but the pass rate is even lower, so they're even more strict in assessing their pilots. So you see that there is a problem there, because I just told you it's a glorious moment to become a pilot. You will certainly find a job, and at the same time I'm telling you, wait a moment, because once you finish the course and you go for an assessment with a company, there is something that varies between a 50% and a 30% chances that you go for an assessment to look for a job and you don't pass the assessment.
Paolo's Pilot Lounge. Like and subscribe now.
And you see that there is a problem. There is a mismatch of information there. How is it possible we need pilot and company does not hire pilots? Well, to dig a bit more into this problem, we have to discuss what I call the scholastic learning. What is the meaning of this scholastic learning? Well, what happens is that many of the European schools, I would say especially found in Southern Europe, so Italy, Spain, France, maybe a little bit of Germany as well. But what happened is that what you do when you're young is that you go to school, and the scholastic learning is just learning what the teacher is telling you. So if I tell you 10 things, okay, all you have to do is to repeat some of the 10 things I told you. Maybe just 6 is enough, and you will have a result of 60% that in most of the schools is considered a pass. So basically, if I tell you the name of the 10 highest European mountains, you just reply to me with the name of the first 6 or just randomly 6 names, and that's enough. Okay, you got a 6th, you forgot the remaining 4. But that is scholastic learning. That is something that is not professional learning. And when it comes to aviation, you have to demonstrate professional learning. And this is a significant difference, for example, from the university, when you remain in this scholastic learning objective. What is the difference between professional and scholastic learning? Well, the scholastic I just told you, you just need to learn part of what is given to you in order to be successful. In the professional learning, you have to learn everything and even more. Take an example. Let's presume that I am a professional and I come to your house to install a water boiler, okay? Gas boiler that produce hot water and produce heating for the house, okay? I come to your house and I install the boiler, it's correctly installed, it produces hot water, but the heating doesn't work, okay? And at this point I tell you, okay, but look at this job. I installed the heater perfectly, it looks very nice, and the hot water is working perfectly, and it's summer, so 60% of this machine is working perfectly. You don't need heating in summer, so come on, let's pay me and I'll just go away. Of course, you will say, no, I don't pay you for as long as you don't make sure that also the heating works correctly, because in a few months from now it's going to be winter and I'm going to be needing the heating in my house, okay? So that is kind of obvious, but that is the logic between scholastic and professional. When you are a professional, you need to have the 100% absolutely correct and professionally known. The job has to be 100% correctly done. So I have to respect all the standards in installation of that heating machine. I have to give you the hot water, I have to give you the heating, even if now is summer, but that machine has to be able to give you the heating as well. Now, if I'm a true professional, actually, what would happen? Well, you know very well, when you get true professionals coming to your house, they install something like the water boiler, and then they go up saying, oh, madam, look at this radiator, this is quite old. What about changing with a new one, or what about installing an air conditioning that will support the water boiler? This will improve the efficiency, the thermal efficiency of your house, and blah blah blah, and they start at the end selling you something extra. So a true professional is not doing 100%, is doing 150%. So I did my job, I installed my water boiler, and after that I also sold you something else like the air conditioning to support the thermal efficiency of your house or whatever. So that is exactly what professional learning is. In aviation, you need to go through a process of professional learning. So that's a very first important point to put on the side, is that when you do aviation courses, you have to make sure that this course will give you a professional learning and that you will be studying as a professional. So you will be given 100, you don't have to learn 60. You do have to learn 150% of what it has been given to you in order to be successful. Another important thing of becoming a pilot is understanding that this knowledge is required by the authority, is recognized by the authority as being KSA. What does KSA means? Is knowledge, skills, and attitude. What does this mean? It means that the authority recognizes that to become a pilot, you need to acquire and to learn items which belongs to those three areas, which is the knowledge, so studying, but studying is not going to be enough. You need to acquire skills, so the ability to fly the aircraft, to mechanically interact with the aircraft, but not only skills in manual flying, but skills in managing the automation as well. And then attitude, acquire a way of thinking and reasoning that strictly belongs to the mentality of a pilot. So there must be also change in attitude, learning how to act, how to reason as a pilot. And all those three areas are required to become a pilot. So you will be learning and then as a pilot practicing your knowledge on those three areas.
Paolo's Pilot Lounge. Like and subscribe now.
Now, when it comes to the Ryanair Future Flyer Academy, we have to say that the advantage is that the students are followed much more closer. And this is kind of logic, because obviously if the company knows that you will be his own pilot, they want their own pilot to have an high performance, a very good performance, a professional performance. So since the beginning of the course, there will be instructors looking behind your performance and assessing if this performance is matching the professional requirement that the company wants from you or not. But before getting too much into the detail on how the course is, let's describe which option you have as it is today to become a pilot. Now, the first way is to apply as a military pilot. Becoming pilot through the military system is a great advantage because it's free of charge. You will normally have to pay absolutely nothing for that. So that is definitely a great advantage. Now, I don't have European numbers, but we have to admit that applying for military and passing the whole training and assessment process is not easy. If you look into Italian numbers, I think for the year 2023 we had something like 4,000, 5,000 applications, out of which the Italian Air Force pulled out something like 50 pilots. So basically we're saying that less than 1% of the candidates actually successfully became pilot. So becoming pilot through the military is definitely a very challenging, a very difficult pathway. Now, we have to say at the same time that being a military pilot is totally different than being a civil pilot. When you are a military pilot, obviously you are serving your country, meaning that, well, I don't think that Europe is looking forward to get involved into a war, although recently around the world there's weird thing going on. But even if your country does not get into a war, it could be, sometimes is happening, that the military guys get involved in what they call a military act, so an action of war in a moment of peace. This is a bit more likely probably with the NATO countries, and anyway, the military has several functions like the search and rescue, like the rescue of national people when something happens. So for example, when a war spreads and the bombs start falling out of the skies, well, who is going to pick up his own national people and take them out of that country which is at war? Guess who? The military. So obviously the mission of the military is a much more complex mission, is a much more responsible mission, and is not always as relaxed, I would say, as being an airline pilot. As a matter of fact, a military pilot is risking his own life for his national interest. That is his job, as a matter of fact. The second option is to grow to what I will call today the white-tail program. What is the white-tail program? Well, the white-tail program is what always existed in civil aviation. So since the beginning of times, if you wanted to be a pilot, you went to the military. Now, if you can't be a pilot through the military system, you would pay your own licenses and become a civil pilot to a civil flight school. Now, the white-tail is exactly that. The white-tail program might be divided into programs. One is the so-called modular course, and the other is the so-called ab initio course. What does this change? Well, the modular course, as the words say, is a number of modules, a block of things that you can take in time at your own pace whenever you want, whenever you are ready to take it. Now, modular courses will take as much time as you like. So this is, for example, the ideal choice if you are working. So if you're working and you can't really afford to pay entirely your license, but you want to start flying, well, you could start with the modular. So you start getting the PPL, the private pilot license, and after you have the PPL, then you do what is the so-called hour building you move to the instrument flight rule, you move to the theory of the ATPL and so on. So all of these, they're modules that you just take whenever you're ready to take it. And to obtain the ATPL license, so what you are looking for is the pilot license, and when I say pilot license, I mean the ATPL license, because the PPL is a pilot license, but as the word says, it only allows you to work as a private pilot. Not to work, actually, to fly as a private pilot for your own fun, but not for commercial purposes, okay? With the ATPL is the airline transport pilot license. Well, now you have a license that is usable for the purpose of working. So this modular program will bring you to the ATPL in the amount of time that you want. So as I say, this is, for example, ideal if you are working and you don't have time to spend, or you don't have so much time to spend on those courses. Personally, I've seen guys becoming pilot at the age of 45, even 50, and they've been in a modular course for something like 10 or 15 years. So they took a very long time to do all the course, but they managed to get to the end. Now, we have to say that once you have the ATPL license, is actually an ATPL frozen license. What does it mean, frozen? It means that you do have the ATPL license, but it's not the full license. The full ATPL license requires 1,500 hours of flight, meaning that you can only do the full ATPL license after you have worked in an airline company for approximately 2 or 3 years. So what you need is the ATPL frozen, and this, as we say, modular course will bring you to the ATPL frozen. The other option is to take the ab initio course. The ab initio integrated course is a course that brings you from 0 hour to approximately 170 hour and obtaining straight away the ATPL license. So you will not obtain a PPL, you will not obtain a CPL, you will not make a separate exam. Everything is included in the integrated course. So as the word says, everything is integrated in that course. And at the end, you obtain exactly the same license, the ATPL license. Now, is there any difference between two licenses? The answer is no, the two licenses are absolutely the same. Will this cause any disadvantage at the moment of the assessment with the companies? The answer is unfortunately yes. Normally, the modular courses, they're seen a little bit with a bad eye. Why? The reason is mainly the money savers, guys, and that is something that I totally discourage from you. But there is a number of people that, because it's a modular and you can take the module when and where you want, all they do, they just start looking around and say, okay, which is the school that gave me the PPL for a cheaper price? And they go there, and then they go and say, okay, but what is the school that gave me the hour building for the cheaper price? And they go there, and then they go, which is the school that gave me the IFR for the cheaper price? So they start moving from left to right, from one school to the other, in order to save money. And that is totally reasonable that you want to save money. But when it comes about your training, unfortunately, you can't only reason in which one is cheaper. Now, what happens very often that these guys, they've been moving from one school to the other and they have lack of knowledge. But because they're not produced by any specific school, there's not going to be any specific school that's going to be addressing that lack of knowledge. So very often the pilots coming from modular, they have a lower quality of training. But as I say, this is not because we as a school, so Aviomar, produce those two courses. You might decide to buy those either, of course, modular or integrated in Aviomar. We do have those two courses, and it's not that we give less quality if you are modular. We give you exactly the same quality of training, okay? But the problem is that what happens is that very often pilots coming from modulars, they didn't follow the course to the same school. Now you say, okay, but what if I do a modular and follow the same school? The other problem is that because it took a lot of years, the companies are afraid that you kind of forgot the knowledge you acquired 10 years ago. Because it's true that the pilot training requires continuity, meaning that if you train a pilot 170 hours in 2 years, This pilot, I would say, is like, sporting guys, is a well warmed up guy. He has been doing a significant amount of hours in a significant short time, so he has been flying a lot. Guys coming from modular, they maybe come from 2 or 3 years where they've been flying just 20 hours. So with 20 hours of flight per year, most likely the pilot has forgotten a lot of the required knowledge. It does not mean that you do. So that there are many guys, as I say, that they are working and they don't have money to pay their course. So the modular is the only solution. And they're actually excellent pilot because they keep the knowledge up and fresh. They do what I just said before. They do learn professionally their lessons. So they are excellent pilot. But statistically speaking, the companies realize that pilots coming from modular courses, they have a little bit, as average, a little bit less quality than the pilot coming from integrated courses. So normally pilot coming from integrated courses, they are preferred at the assessment. Does not mean that if you're coming from a modular, you're not gonna get a job. As I said, I have several students coming from modular. I had several students that took dozens of years to become pilot, coming from modular, and they still today work as pilot. So does not mean that is a bad choice. You just have to find what is the correct choice for you. But for example, if you say yes because I have other interests, in the spare time I play soccer, okay, and because I want to have spare time I just go for a modular. Anyway, the two are the same. My answer is no, wait a moment, the two are not the same. So if there is a valid reason to choose a modular, go for a modular, but otherwise try, if possible, to prefer an integrated course. Now the problem is the integrated course is very dense in learning and studying, and it's practically impossible to follow an integrated course while working. So you must dedicate, same as you do for the university, I would say, but you must dedicate approximately 2 years exclusively to the studying of flying. Now, once you have obtained your ATPL frozen license, you will need to find a job, because we say those courses are white-tailed. There's absolutely no connection with any airline company whatsoever. So you're gonna start applying to the various airline companies, and eventually you go for your pilot assessment and pass the pilot assessment to one of the companies. What happens is that you have a TPL frozen, is a generic license. This license allows you to fly aircraft, simple aircraft like the small aircraft that you've been training on. It does not allow you to fly more complex aircraft, like it could be a 747 or a 737 or an Airbus 320. So once you find the job with your own company, you then have to be so-called type rated. So you have to be rated for the specific aircraft that the company is flying. So say you find a job with Ryanair, you will need to be rated on the Boeing 737. You find a job with Wizz Air, you are going to be in the need of being rated on the Airbus 320. Now these ratings typically they're paid by the pilot, which means that the price of the courses that you see there, they range between 90,000 euros. But on top of that, after you have found a job, you now have to pay for your own type rating. So you have to pull out another 15,000 to 30,000 euros in order to be rated for the specific aircraft, making the total cost of the training in the range of 100,000. I would say, if you want to be on the safe side, count 110,000, and then you will be able to pay also for the type rating. So this is the normal pathway for civil aviation. But there is a third solution, which is coming up in the recent years. And as I say, this is just coming up because there is a pilot shortage and there is the need from companies to guarantee a significant input of pilots to their own company. And this solution will actually be partially financed, normally is partially financed by the specific airlines. So these programs, I call it the sponsored program or the mentored program, meaning that the specific company is sponsoring your training. You still have to pay your training. Don't misunderstand me. So your course is going to be in prices variable. We could say something around 90,000 euros. And you get only the option of the ab initio integrated course, because as we just said before, the companies prefer the ab initio courses. So you will be on an integrated course. This integrated course will bring you to the ATPL. You will obtain exactly the same license that you obtain with a generic whitetail course, but at the conclusion of this course you don't have to go for looking for a job. You just have to go straight to your own company because you've been trained for that company. So you go straight to that company, and in the specific case of the Ryanair Future Flyer Academy, what will happen is that you will not have to pay the rating, the type rating on the aircraft, because that is sponsored by the company. So this means that you have a significant saving of money, and you also have the guarantee that you will work straight away for the company, so you don't have to find a job. You remember that 50 to 20% chances of finding a job I mentioned before, but this is cut out because now you got the absolute certainty that upon completion of the course you will find your job with that company because you've been trained with the standard and the requirements of that company. So this is definitely one advantage. Among the mentored or sponsored course, there is another option, which is the MPL. The MPL is a totally different license than the ATPL. Now, Ryanair today does not make any proposal on MPL licenses, although I think this thing has been discussed and it could be a good option. So what is the difference between an ATPL license and an MPL license? So we say the ATPL is what you get with any civilian flight school course, and this allow you to work on any aircraft, any company. Just have to pass the assessment. Of course, you have to be rated on the specific aircraft that that company is flying, but once this is done, then you can fly for whatever company. The multi-pilot license, the MPL, is a completely different type of license, which, as the words say, is specifically designed for multi-pilot operation. Now, that is not a problem because anyway, as it is today, all commercial air transport is based on multi-pilot operation. So the fact that you are restricted on multi-pilot and you can't fly single pilot is not really a big problem because anyway, by law, you cannot fly commercial flying in single pilot. However, the MPL is limited and restricted to the specific company, to the SOP and the aircraft specific to this company. What does it mean? It means that when you take a course which is sponsored by a company, you really have to wonder about the health status of this company. Because, especially in the case of an MPL, in the case you finish your course and the company went bankrupt, now your license was strictly linked to the standard and the aircraft and the operation of that specific company. Therefore, it means that basically you lost all your investment. In the case of the Ryanair Future Flyer Academy, that delivers to you a full ATPL license, well, you still have an ATPL license in your hand, meaning that now you can go and apply and look for a job as any other pilot coming from a white-tail course would do. So basically, if Ryanair goes bankrupt, you still have a loss. If Ryanair goes bankrupt and by the time you finish your course, you will lose the 30,000 euros of the type rating that Ryanair would have sponsored to you. But again, you have a license in your hand that can be used to work as a pilot. In the case of the MPL license, you don't have anything in your hands, so you can't work as a pilot. I personally analyzed the situation of some MPL pilot coming from bankruptcy companies. There's been several cases in Europe. We had Flybe, we had Alitalia Kai, but in all cases, basically it's impossible to convert. The easier way or the cheaper way at the end would be to starting a modular or an integrated course from the beginning. So basically, if you have a modular course, you really have to pay attention, but in all cases, you really have to pay attention to the health status of the company. So, because here we are talking about the Future Flyer Academy with Ryanair, provided by Aviomar, well, let's go on Google and let's give a look to what is the Ryanair growth expectations. Will it be bankrupt by the, by the end we finish, or I finish my training course with Aviomar, where it says that Ryanair has an ambitious growth, 300 million passengers annually, and there are 350 Boeing MAX 10 order. In reality, the total order aircraft of Ryanair, as far as I know, is 350. Well, Google says 300, so I don't want to contradict, but as far as I know, there's still some MAX 8 that has to come. So the MAX 10s and the MAX 8 in total should give a total number of 350 aircraft. If I don't go wrong, it says, yeah, the passenger number should be 215 million passengers by fiscal year 27, sorry. And, well, it doesn't really talk about the financial position. Is BBB+, which is basically an extremely solid position. The B stands for the fact that the company is very sensible, as any other aviation company, very sensible to the market fluctuations. So as soon as there is a pandemic, a war going on, yeah, the company will have definitely a significant loss in money. But all aviation companies are like that. But the BBB plus means for the rest is excellent and is extremely solid. Profits, I can see. No, I don't find it there. But I remember numbers which were in the range of 1.9 billions of euro in the previous year and 1.7 this year, with an increase of passenger and reduction in fares. So basically the company is doing very well. It has a massive number of aircraft. We're talking of already 650 aircraft in service, with a massive order of remaining 350 aircraft to come in the next 8 years. So saying that Ryanair is going to go bankrupt by producing something like 2 billions of euro every year, thinking that the owners will decide to shut down the operation of Ryanair, I would say it's totally impossible. Honestly, I don't see any chance that Ryanair goes bankrupt in the coming years. But as I said, if you decide to take a sponsored course for a company, well, give a look to what is this company, what is the size of this company, the stability, the certainties that this company can give you, because in case this company goes bankrupt, then you might find yourself without a job or in the need of finding a job, depending on the type of license that this training course provides to you. Now, one question that may arise is, okay, but what if I change my mind? What if I want to move from one program to the other? Well, not everything is possible. For example, as we just said, moving from an MPL to whatever S calls modular or integrated is impossible. The easier way will be starting again from the beginning. But if you are, for example, in an integrated course, you have ways to move to a modular. If you are in a Ryanair Future Flyer Academy course, you might, if you wish, decide to go out of this program and basically become a white-tail program. Now, you can also move the other way around from the white-tail to the Future Flyer Academy. There are the so-called gate entries, okay? So there is one way, which is entering, let's say, from modular courses, enter into the Ryanair Future Flyer Academy. At the moment, you have to do the IFR hours. So basically, more or less halfway through the training, when you have approximately 70 or 80 hours with all your TPL exam completed, you can decide to join the Future Flyer Academy. Or you can decide to join the Future Flyer Academy at the very last moment, which is basically at the moment of the MCC, which is the very last part. We're gonna go later on onto how the course is structured, but the MCC, the multi-crew coordination course, is the last part of the training, and you might decide to join at that stage. Now the problem is, if you decide to join at that stage, then the company sponsoring of the type rating is not applicable anymore. So the sponsoring for the type rating, so those 30,000 euros that the company pays to you or gives to you in order to pay the type rating, well, they're only offered if you are from an ab initio course. And that's an important thing to consider, because it's still starting from a white tail and then joining the Future Flyer Academy is going to cost you money. The other important thing to consider is that joining at a later stage, there will be a number of assessment run by the company before joining. And obviously the assessment which is done at the beginning of an ab initio course, they're quite easy assessment. I would say there's not much to assess because you are not a pilot, you never studied to be a pilot. Basically, you don't need to demonstrate any knowledge that a pilot needs because you are at zero experience as a pilot. Obviously, if you decide to join at a later stage, of course, the technical interview and the assessment are going to be a little bit more strict. And sometimes the company might decide not to accept a number of pilots. So there is a higher chance of not passing the assessment if you try to join at a later stage. So joining at a later stage, is it a good idea? I don't know. I would say if you have to start from zero, well, no. Start from an ab initio sponsor course for the company that you're interested in.
Paolo's Pilot Lounge. Like and subscribe now.
I'm trying to be as much objective as possible. I'm not saying that you must choose this product because that's the best. There is no best product. There is a series of options, which, as we say, it goes from the military to the modular, if you're working, probably the best option, to the whitetail, and then the sponsor course, so the ATPL Integrated Future Flyer Academy. Now, which one fits better to you? You have to evaluate by your own situation. For example, if you're working, probably the modular course is the only option. But if you are thinking of an integrated course, well, then the ATPL Integrated is a very good option. Now, the very important thing when you choose those courses is to think about the language, because many courses, they're taken in the local language of the school. So if you go in a school in Poland, the course is in Polish. If you go in Italy, it's in Italian. In France, the course is in French, and so on. No, the aviation works with English. Actually, yes, the French are the only one which are excused because the national company in France, they normally work using French. But apart from those companies, all other European companies, they use English as a standard language. Meaning that if you want to become a pilot, you have to speak English. So it's very important that your pilot course is taken into the English language. And this is one of the first advantage of the Future Flyer Academy, that all the instructors, they come from the Ryanair environment. So it's an international environment. Some of those instructors doesn't even speak Italian because they come from different countries. So of course the course is going to be everything in English, and that's, as I said, a very important starting point for you as a student. So obviously doing a course which is guided to a company require a little bit involvement. There is a significant difference. Now, I would say the first difference is quite obvious, and it's on the general data protection. When you go and look for a job, well, the employer cannot really look into all your personal data, all your performance, all your exams, and know what were the opinion of the instructors. If you are on a Future Flyer Academy, since day one, you sign a working contract with Ryanair. So you are an employee, technically speaking, and factually, you are definitely seen as an employee. You are a future employee of Ryanair. This means that throughout all your training, your performance is gonna be monitored by both instructor and the company. And this is something that in the whitetail you don't have. Now, don't misunderstand me. It does not mean that if you do a generic ab initio integrated course, you start the course and nobody's going to be asking you if you're doing the exams. But basically, the whole thing is going to be that you do the theoretical course, and then the instructors will be asking you how you're doing with the studying, how you're doing with the exams. I think you should fly a little bit less and study a bit more to pass some of the exam. You know, they will give you a little bit of hints. There's no formal examination and testing to evaluate if you are factually progressing as you should through your ab initio training. Instead, that's exactly what happens on the Ryanair Future Flyer Academy. Since the beginning of the course, since I would say the second month, you start having some progress tests where we start seeing if you are progressing correctly. So basically, what does this mean? It means that both the school, Aviomar, and Ryanair, they're keeping an eye on you and on your performance. So this might be seen as a little bit more stressing. But as I say, the counterpart is quite an interesting one, because the counterpart is that you have your job guaranteed. So obviously what's happening is that the company wants to make sure that his pilots are trained properly. So in few words, what I'm saying here is that if you are a guy that says, well, you know, Friday and Saturday I go play football, and on Sunday I go to the beach, and I don't want to change my habit, so I want to keep doing it. Well, you might easily get involved into a whitetail ab initio course. Nobody's gonna ever tell you anything. But if you get involved into a Ryanair Future Flyer Academy, well, I will discourage you to approach the course with this aptitude, because obviously the company wants to see that you behave as a professional pilot. And as a professional pilot, obviously the answer, well, no, actually I didn't study because I was going to the beach on Sunday. Well, the company is not going to be happy with this answer, definitely. So if you are on a whitetail, you're protected by the general data protection. So even if me, the instructor, asks you, well, how you're doing with the exams, and you tell me I'm a bit behind because this summer and I go to the beach during summer, well, I say, okay, but it's going to be protected. So I can't really say to anyone that you are not very serious in your study. But if you are in a Future Flyer Academy program, well, your performance is monitored, and as I say, the company wants to see that you're taking this study seriously. So this means that the ab initio integrated course require a lot of study, but especially the Future Flyer Academy require a lot of dedicated study and a lot of hard work, because you have to respect the time that the course is giving you.
Paolo's Pilot Lounge. Like and subscribe now.
In conclusion, as I have already said, or I tried to explain earlier in this video, there is no good or bad course, okay? There's no best choice, there is not only one choice. The choice of the courses is basically what fits better to you. Now, when you take the decision, we have to look also at some statistical numbers. What are the numbers? Well, we said that mainly we can compare three parts with Aviomar, and one part is the modular, one part is the integrated, and one part is the Future Flyer Academy. Well, the numbers they give Ryanair, as I said at the beginning, range in approximately 50% pass rate of the pilot coming from whitetail, which means that if you go from a whitetail course, you reduce significantly the chances of finding a job immediately after completing your training course. The chances to find a job reduce even more with a modular, with the reasons that I explained before, to a number which is roughly something around 48%. From a whitetail integrated ab initio, we are in the range of approximately 50 to 55%. However, if you decide to conclude your course with EPS MCC, you increase significantly the chances of finding a job. Again, the APS MCC, you have to be cautious because it really depends from the flight school. You might take it in Aviomar on the Airbus 320, on the 737, but not on any other of our simulator. Although it would be certifiable, we don't do it because the purpose of the APS MCC is to train pilot on this type of complex aircraft. But you might find courses on basically aircraft or simulators that reproduce aircraft which are easier to fly or not even reproducing specific aircraft model. Still, these courses are called or certified as EPS. Doesn't really make sense, but it might happen. So you really have to look after what kind of product you're buying. But technically speaking, once you have an APS NCC on your hand, you significantly raise the chances of passing a pilot assessment if you pass the APS MCC successfully. Now, for the Ryanair Future Flyer Academy, we have a pass rate which is in the range of 96%, meaning that among all pilots coming from all flight school, not only Aviomar, but all flight school, well, the pass rate is 96%, which is definitely higher. Now, of course, the question becomes, okay, but what happens to that 4% of pilot that does not pass? What happens to this, 50% or even the remaining 34% of the pilots that do not pass the assessment coming from whitetail? What happens to them? Well, obviously with Ryanair, if you come from a whitetail, the company has no other option to send you a letter that says you do not fit our requirements, so thank you very much, you can apply again in 6 months. Then you apply again, maybe they will never call you again, maybe they will call you again in 2 years, 3 years, you don't know what's going to happen, but basically that's it. You receive a letter that says, we don't need you, thank you very much. If you are a Future Flyer Academy, the situation changes completely, because given the fact that there is a continuous discussion between Aviomar and Ryanair about your performance, and as we said, you signed a contract as the beginning of the course, so you are considered a Ryanair employee. Well, we don't actually send you away immediately unless it's been already failures before. You already received some letters that were complaining for your poor performance, stuff like that. But normally this doesn't happen. So at least in Aviomar, as I say, this never happens. So all the pilots that managed to conclude the Future Flyer Academy course in Aviomar, what happened is that eventually, yes, somebody failed the entry assessment with Ryanair, but then there is a discussion between Aviomar and Ryanair again. There is a retraining which is suggested to the pilot, and this retraining, once taken, will again allow you to go for the assessment. Unlike it is for the whitetail, where you can apply after 6 months and God knows when they call you again for the assessment, with the Future Flyer Academy, in the time frame of 2 months, basically you got your second chance granted for the assessment. And as I just said, thankfully everybody passed. Does this mean that everybody will pass in the future? Well, I don't know. Sooner or later somebody will fail eventually twice. I hope this won't happen because the pilots are well trained. The reason why there is such a high pass rate is not that this course is magical, is that there is a strict monitoring and a high performance required throughout all the course. So there's many pilots that does not reach the end of the course, and that's why those who reach the end of the course, then they manage to pass the assessment. Yeah, there is 100% pass rate. We will see in the next video that typically the amount of failure occur in the first phase in the Future Flyer Academy. So this is a good thing because you know immediately if you can perform as required in order to meet this 100% or not. There's been cases, however, of failure occurring at later stage, maybe halfway to the training. It might happen, it's normally people that, pilots that we saw, they had some problems already in the first phase, and then we discovered that also the second phase problems increases rather than getting solved. And so that's where the failure came from, okay? It never comes as a surprise, let's make it clear, okay? In the whitetail, it might occur, again, failures. Normally, again, is the theoretical examination that are the most difficult ones. But, as I say, the whitetail then has the problem of being really in the need of looking after themselves, make sure that they keep up the good job, the good performance, that they do have professional learning throughout their training and throughout their course. Now, you can say, okay, but in the other case, what happens to the other pilots? Well, of course, if you don't pass the assessment with Ryanair, you can apply to other companies, and eventually you pass the assessment with some other companies. Very often what happens is that you need, or you decide to take some additional training courses with a flight school, where you do some simulator training in order to fix the problem that you realized you had at the moment of the assessment with the airline company. And indeed, very often this requires also some personal study, because you realize that you had some lack of knowledge that you have to cover before going to the next assessment. But then those pilots, of course, will go to other assessments with other companies, and in some cases they will eventually pass the assessment. There is a number of pilots, unfortunately, I don't really know what the number is, but again, we can try to Google it and see what Google says. Percentage, how many pilots obtain a license but do not find a job. Again, there is no precise number, but it says, however, the ICA reported an estimated 15% of unemployment. So the final number could be as much as 50% of the student pilots that finish their courses, they obtain their licenses, but then they don't find a job. As we said, the initial assessment with Ryanair, 50% fail rate. Many of those will find a job with other companies. Some of those will not find a job at all. So you see that even if in this 50% there are pilots which are employed for other reasons, we are looking at something like 1 or 2 pilots over 10 that finally, coming from a white-tailed course, does not find a job. And this is a serious number, because the course itself is fairly expensive. So you have to choose carefully your course. And there is a last number that remains, and again, I don't have exact statistic, but I can give you a rough number. And this rough number is how many chances do I have to join the Future Flyer Academy. So, well, I don't have exact numbers, I don't have exact statistics, because sometimes I, yes, participate to the assessment, but I don't manage the whole assessment process, and I don't have the numbers to give you exact statistical numbers. So for the AB initial course, the entry assessment, I would say, is extremely easy. I'm not saying you can come totally unprepared. Of course, you have to show yourself being a serious person and being prepared with math and physics and having all the required skills that a young boy or girl must have to become a pilot. We typically had failures connected to the English, to which we informed the pilot. They came back after a few months, normally 6 months, and most of the cases the pilots passed the assessments, or the students passed the assessment to become pilot. We had a case of people being failed for other reasons, like math and physics, but again, those pilots came back after 6 months and they actually passed the assessment. There's been cases of failing for personal reasons, but most likely those failures were correct, because these young boys and girls didn't even try to apply again, didn't even insist. So maybe we found that they were not really motivated, and probably was true, so that's fine. But I would say normally the assessment, if you want to pass it, maybe you don't pass the first time, but if you want to pass it, you will pass it. If you join at the Gateway 2 or Gateway 3, which again is not ideal, because we say the sponsorship by Ryanair occurs on the initial course, so you lose the money of the type rating. But if you try to join at these gateways, now the assessments is a bit more difficult, because what happens is that you already are an experienced pilot. So while in the beginning, I can't ask you much, because you're just coming from the high school and there's no much to ask you. Well, when you come from a flight school, when you come from 70 hours of flight, there is a bit more questions that the assessor might ask you. And it starts to be a bit higher fail rate. So the fail rate may occur for several reasons and might be varying, I would say, between 65-70%. This fail rate at the entry could happen also at the APS MCC. But especially for the APS MCC, then you have to be really cautious because the APS MCC becomes extremely difficult. So we had cases of failure on the APS MCC itself from those pilots that joined the Future Flyer Academy at the stage of the APS MCC. So it is true that you have these 65-70% chances of not passing at the APS MCC, but it's also true that not passing the APS MCC starts to be a bit more likely. There are chances, okay? So we get out of that 100% chances that I said before, okay? So yes, you might join the Future Flyer Academy, but you have to be advised that if you get these, let's say, side gates joining at a later stage, then the chances to be successful start to reduce. So if you want to guarantee 100% chances, the best solution is take the ab initio course. I would say that is the easier way to ensure the highest possibility of success. Alright then, we will discuss in the next video what is the work that is required. We will see how are the courses structured. For the moment, this is everything for today. The next video should be programmed to come out no more than 1 week from this video. So if you're one of the first persons looking at this video, be patient just for a little week. You got the second video coming up. I hope you found all this information useful to you. Once again, I would be very grateful if you could put a like and subscribe to this video. And thank you for your attention. I will see you soon.